And I guess the way to start is by saying, no one could have imagined when you wrote this book and called it Always Home, that you would be releasing it into a world where virtually everyone is always home.
It is, the irony is not lost on me. And in fact, last night, my boyfriend was like, what if you are a prophet and you had called the book Everyone Employed and Free Right Now? And I was like, would that I had had that kind of, it just reverse prescience, because it feels.
That's the next book.
Yeah, that's the next book.
That's the next book, yeah.
Employment is up and we're all outside will be the title. No, I know it's uncanny. It's uncanny that I went from naming this book Always Home. And actually, this is a nice little anecdote since you know this other person in question, but the book was called Home as a working title. And I was being sort of urged by my editor, Peter Gathers, to consider something a little bit more unique, a little bit more elaborated. And it was actually Calvin Trillin, who is someone who features in the book, but is also one of the dearest family friends and someone I rely on for a sense of humor, who sort of sobered up for a second. He was like, oh, and he took it seriously. He's like, what about Always Home? And he calls me Fanala. He goes, what about Always Home, Fanala? So maybe we have him to blame for this title being quite so on the nose, but it's coming to bear that we are now very literally always home. And my boyfriend and I live in San Francisco, but we came to Berkeley to be with my mom during this quarantine period. So
there are 3 of you always home?
There are 3 of us. Yeah. Yes. Andrew's a very welcome mediator.
And what is it like being a grown-up? I mean, you write so beautifully about your childhood, and I have to say, I think everybody who reads the book is going to be envious of this amazing childhood filled with not only wonderful food, and the food you describe is fantastic, and you're always traveling and meeting incredible people, and you had all these extraordinary characters in your life. And one of the really wonderful things about the book is you get to meet these wonderful people like, Lulu Perrault, who's kind of your adopted grandmother and a legend for cooks everywhere. And Nilüfer Chapuria, who has herself written what I think is one of the great cookbooks about Parsi cooking. So here you are as an adult, always home with your mother, living in a world that is not filled with all of these people, but just this very small little family unit. What's that like?
One of the I do think that I'm lucky in that my mom and I get along very well, irrespective of pandemics. And we have been able to spend really long stretches together, whether it's a rented house in, Sicily or something, or, where we've really been together in a kind of quite focused way for periods of time. So it's not a totally foreign arrangement. But that said, I do think that the conditions of this moment have definitely sort of limbered both of us in a way, and there's less rigidity around things. It's like just, we're all going to have to be in this space together, and how can you be comfortable together? And actually a lot of that has to do with food. It's like talking together about what you're going to cook, and also just indulging in certain things. I mean, Andrew likes to drink coffee in the morning, and my mom gave up coffee many years ago now to begin her truly evangelical crusade for pu'er tea, which is she'll be plugging. It'll be just a little advertisement in the middle of this for pu'er tea, and my mom should be getting kickbacks. It's to smell a coffee, to smell coffee in the morning, and for Andrew to be making toast and using some of Patty Curtin's amazing apricot jam, and just allowing all of ourselves to just dip back into these more nostalgic flavors and things that that give you comfort has been a kind of way of both feeling ourselves to be more at peace in this moment, but also together, because I think that the recipes in this book are not exactly how I cook now, although some of them are. They're very much a collection of recipes that I feel like are the foundations of how I thought about and learned about food. And so some of them are quite nostalgic, or they're those ones that are the really indelible memories of food from childhood. So there is this feeling almost like we are in this pandemic, in this house, we're almost in the same sort of climate of cooking as I was in writing the book, which is an interesting place to have found ourselves and kind of unexpected, but very welcome.
So how do you decide what you're going to eat for dinner every night?
Well, it's really determined by what we have. And what we prepared for in advance. We're very lucky that we get a box of salad and herbs and vegetables from Bob Kennard's farm. Mm-hmm. He's delivering them to Chez Panisse to be given out, ordered, I should say, and given to the people in the Chez Panisse community.
Well, it's because the restaurant's now been closed for about 3 weeks. The idea was to find some kind of way to continue supporting the farm that relies entirely on Chez Panisse as the purchaser. So this allows the public to purchase boxes and have really beautiful produce delivered once a week. But we still run through our salad fast.
It's clear from your book that salad is a major part of both of your diets.
When people ask what my favorite recipe from the book is or what my favorite food is, and I even acknowledge that that this is the case in a book dedicated entirely to salad. I mean, in a chapter dedicated to salad. And nonetheless, I'm like, hey, it's salad. Green salad is the thing.
Michael?
Yeah.
I'm recording.
Sharing space in quarantine. It's a negotiation that needs to be made. I tell my mom once an hour to please turn her phone onto silent so I don't have to hear the little tap 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 sound on her iPhone. You find your limits very quickly with when you're in a single space all together all the time.
That's true.
It's a great thing to have our little garden out back, because we've always sort of gone out there to pick herbs, rosemary plant. We have a Meyer lemon tree. It's a very small garden, but there's some lettuce and parsley and various things in the garden that I can feel like I can always count on. But I want to make that garden bigger now and really make it more into that victory garden that my parents had when I grew up.
There's a patch of what used to be kind of mostly, I should say, 3-cornered leek, which is also what has taken over a lot of the more sort of wilder edges of the back garden. But the front little divider between the sidewalk and the road in our front yard has just been this sort of neglected, largely wild volunteer leeks. And my mom had it ripped up last week to plant a new little vegetable victory garden in the front of that house. And we got this sweetest little note slipped through the mailbox by some woman who we didn't know, but who'd passed by on several walks and just said, Alice, thank you for everything you do for the community, but thank you for planting this victory garden and for making it visible, because it's so important right now. And just to have the immediate affirmation that it was registering with our community, who are just everyone trying to get out, if they can, for a little walk or whatever, and to see this meaningful cycle.
I imagine that a lot of people who are watching this are going to be planting gardens for the first time. Mm-hmm. So what do you suggest to them? I mean, the garden is such a big part of your book, and there's that wonderful moment when you come back from your junior year in France, and and you go and lie down in the garden. And
You did read it in the book.
Well, I think it's really important to have things in the garden that you can't get easily someplace else, like the farmer's market. So, or things that take a long time to mature. I'm inclined to have trees that come to fruit at a certain time. We have a persimmon tree, and we have a apple tree and a quince tree.
A really
very Alice answer. When you're planting your victory garden, be sure you have a persimmon tree.
No, but I mean, everywhere there are different trees to plant that have edible fruits.
But don't you think you would tell someone who's starting right now that they should grow some salad? Like
Absolutely.
Just something easy. You don't need to have a mature orchard in your back garden.
No, but I'm just talking about the big picture of it. That the care of the garden is very important. And if there are some trees there, like I really count on a lemon tree, that it's sort of constantly having fruit. And maybe you don't have a lemon tree on the East Coast. Or
I do not have any lemon trees.
But you know that there were lemon trees in the garden in Paris, the big gardens of the 18th century. And they took the lemon trees inside into the greenhouse for the winter, or they put hay around them. They even had figs that they covered. So I know that we have not explored all the possibilities of really gardening in all different climates. And I'm very excited to really be part of that conversation, because I'm always saying that it's possible to eat locally, completely locally. If you have a greenhouse, I think of Elliot Coleman up there in Maine. He's got a greenhouse that's open all winter with salads and herbs, even carrots. And in summer he closes because they can get the tomatoes, they can get all of the summer ingredients, the beans and all of that. So we just have to learn to eat differently. Dried fruits and nuts, and think about minestrone soup with beans, and you can make a different kind of pesto for the top. I mean, it doesn't have to be basil.
This is very pragmatic advice for the pandemic. I just taking out.
It is practical. It is.
What are we eating tonight?
What are we making tonight? What are we making tonight? Ooh, okay. I probably, like everyone else, we have a ridiculous glut of squash. It's like the one thing that we can't, it's so hard to chip away at various winter squashes. Like, maybe last night we roasted a delicata, just very simply, kind of in little half moons and whatever. And that's easy to do. Just don't even skin it. But when you have like a bunch of weird, not particularly intensely flavored winter squash around, and the one comes in our vegetable box every week. So we're just now like the only holdover week to week. So actually what I think we will make is a mixed winter squash gratin tonight, which is one of the recipes actually from the book that we always make at Thanksgiving. And it's really beautiful. Like you make scalloped pieces overlapping and sort of either if in a round cast iron, the sort of floret. But I think, that would be a good thing to make to diminish the squash population around here.
That recipe looks particularly delicious in the book. There's actually a lot of, I think, interesting cooking advice in your book. One of the things you talk about is you should plant a fig tree, even if you don't live in a place where you can get the fruit, because the leaves are so useful. something as someone who once had a fig tree that grew terrible figs, but the leaves were always useful, always wonderful. The smell of them when you wrap something in fig leaves and cook it, the smell is so wonderful.
When I lived in Brooklyn after college, there was a fig tree in Park. Well, I was in sort of edge of Park Slope, but there was this big fig tree in Park Slope that always had the most beautiful, huge leaves. And I would just go and raid it. But people just assumed that you wouldn't have a fig tree at all in New York and that it wouldn't survive in the snow of the winter. But it was an unbelievably vibrant tree. It just never fruited. But for my purposes, it was fine. It was perfect. Just go in the
and they
night.
make lovely plates, fig trees, fig leaves.
So wonderful to have fig leaves around. And also in London, the same. There, you wouldn't get good figs in London, but you'd always find them, these trees, these actually kind of magnificent trees dotted around the neighborhood. But I'm like a sort of edible flora marauder. Anytime I've been let loose in a leafy neighborhood, I'm terrible. I try to be good about respecting people's actual fenced gardens, but if something is leaning over a fence, I just feel like it's fair game.
And you also talk about using roots. You talk about using the parsley roots.
I will never forget that taste. I was 10 years old when I was in Paris, and my mom probably remembers this too, because I was calling her as much as I humanly could because I was so homesick, and it was a school trip. But the way that the mother of the family who I was staying with on that exchange, just used produce in ways that I had never experienced before. And I'd never tasted parsley roots before that. I tasted celery root. We would use celery root in mashed potatoes and gratins and things like that. But I had never had parsley roots before. And it was like my mind was, or watercress, like what she used in that recipe was.
Well, that's a great recipe. I love that recipe. Watercress is an underused vegetable in America. And actually something that even where I live, where there is nothing in season right now, you can get watercress.
Yeah. Have you made the soup yet, Ruth?
Pardon?
Maybe that's what you're making tonight for dinner.
Well, I actually do cook a lot of watercress, although you use olive oil in yours. I use butter in mine. One of the big differences between us is you did not grow up with much butter, and butter is one of the real staples in my house.
It's true. It's true. It was a second-class citizen over here. No, come on. Even you would contend that we drink olive oil and we sort of nibble at butter if it's around. We have olive oil is king. I think even when you were leaning more French than Italian, I still feel like we used more olive oil by a great margin at home.
A couple of the other things, the whole book is sort of sprinkled through it's not like you say, and here's some great advice, but it's like every few sentences, there's something that is like, oh, I never really thought of that before. Like everything tastes better with lime and there's a wonderful moment where you sort of say that one of the things you learned from Alice was, don't be embarrassed to put something back in the oven. That Alice is constantly taking things out and checking it and then saying it's not done yet and putting it back in, which is something that I think most people are afraid to do. They're afraid that somehow if they interrupt the cooking process, it will be ruined. And
we have the benefit of us mainly not baking, which is like, that sometimes like you will fuck it up. Excuse my language. If you open it in the middle, or, there are things like last night I had to just hold my mother back from opening the oven during the cooking of a souffle. I was like, don't do it. You will deflate it. You will deflate the souffle. Wait. But, most things you can in savory cooking, you do have that kind of elasticity or flexibility. So you can kind of interrupt something to taste and tweak. If you're making something like, if you're baking bread, it's very mysterious. And I think it's partially our culinary predilections don't lend well to, baking, because we are a kind of incremental taste, which is always type cooks, which is also what I'm constantly encouraging people to do, because the recipes aren't really like traditional recipes where you have measurements, but they're almost a kind of story through a recipe, a talking through a recipe, you know, so that, and encouraging you, like, do you like this? If you don't, change it kind of attitude, which I think is also much more consistent with how I see myself, which is more of an intuitive cook who's a writer, and not as a cook who writes, you know, a professional cook who writes.
Yeah, and you sort of talk about, you know, when you talk about David Tanis's cooking, you know, you talk about how he is bold and is one of the people who got to change the cherished Chez Panisse recipes, that that he couldn't keep things the way that they were. And it's a very encouraging book about following your instincts, using your hands, using your senses. And I think a big piece of it is about using all of your senses. I mean, there's this moment I particularly love, because I've never understood why everybody doesn't do this, about quinces. Quinces are the most delicious smell. And, you know, everybody should have a bowl of them in their house all the time. I mean, it's just for the perfume. I mean, even if you don't want to cook with them, just for the aroma of them. And I mean, the book is very sensual about, you know, taste and smell and sound, and, you know, Alice's need to be surrounded by beautiful things. But I wanted you to read. There's a bit where you write about how basically nobody in your family is a baker, that you didn't have sweets much, that dessert in your house was fruit. And you write this beautiful piece about Alice peeling fruit, and that being something that feels good to you, to watch her peeling fruit. But how you basically had a childhood without sugar. You didn't eat candy, you didn't drink soda. And you're, I think, 2 years old with
yeah, it was
yeah, 2.5.
2.5.
And you're with your family in Italy, and you encounter ice cream for the first time. Can you read that?
Sure, yeah, sure. It's crazy that I mean, you know, a lot of the book is not these really concrete memories. It's, they're often just these more like sensory recollections, or, you know, there aren't these real through lines necessarily, or narrative through lines through all the stories. And then there's this memory is so distinct to me, the eating of this ice cream. And I don't know that I've ever seen a photo of it. I just remember the flavor so specifically. Anyways, so when I received the golden waffle cone in hand, with just a modest ball slotted into it, I knew intuitively to apply it to my mouth. The smell was seductive, but muted by the cold. The taste, on the other hand, was intoxicating. The sugar used in this gelato produced a flavor that was completely indistinct from that of the fruit it was meant to intensify, which is to say, it was exactly the right amount of sugar, neither too much nor too little. It had a platonic taste of strawberry, of the ripest, honeyed, late summer berries, so perfectly distilled that the taste seemed almost audible. It could not be confined to the realm of the tongue. So much so that I forgot that my mouth was in fact the best place to receive this newfound manna. I began to use the cone like a melting frozen marker to draw over the whole of my face. I wanted to merge with this food, not just to eat it, but to experience it. My clothes, my hair, all were victims of the brief but unforgettable encounter. I don't remember anything else about that day, and indeed very little, if anything, about that trip to Italy. But I know that my memory of my communion with the gods of sugar and ice cream is firsthand and real, not merely something told to me or photographed. It is etched onto my palate alongside the most indelible of my life's food memories. I don't think my parents took a photo, nor did they try to stop me from sullying every inch of my dress. They just looked on at what happens in that moment that marks the end of 2 years living on the planet ignorant of ice cream. And even though my parents returned to the sugar-free regime, and adhered to it with lamentable rigor, I think they were both pleased to watch me fleetingly lose my mind in flavor.
It says so much about your parenting. Watching your child have this moment of ecstasy with food. And it's such a beautiful description of how ecstatic flavor can be. And, the idea of it being almost audible.
No, she just took that cone, put it to her mouth, and never moved it. Just like went all down her dress. All down. She never, ever took it away.
An ice cream facial, really.
I'll never forget that moment. It was in Siena.
But I think, Mom, I actually, not to be the questioner, but I think talking about, you said something beautiful about, and you talk a lot about how the senses are the pathway into the mind. And I actually think that's something that you should elaborate. Like that's part of.
Well, I was a Montessori teacher, and she really practiced her pedagogy at the turn of the last century, in the 1880s. And she worked in the slums of Naples and in India, where children, she said, were sensorially deprived. And they couldn't experience the world around them because of hunger and poverty. And so she tried to engage them through the senses, through touch, through smell, through taste, listening carefully, looking very carefully. And she managed to really have a breakthrough. And she knew that these are our pathways into our minds. And so it's so important to engage them all to experience the world. I just have taken that idea into all realms of my life.
But also into my childhood.
Yes, well, absolutely. And she was absolutely.
I was the first test subject.
Yes,
for that.
the first test. But living in this fast food culture, we have been indoctrinated since we were kids. And we're not touching, we're not tasting, we're not experiencing that world. We're disconnected and imprisoned, I think. So we need to make that jailbreak. And the best way to do that is out in the garden. I think out in the garden and with food, because food touches every one of those senses.
I so distinctly remember coming into your kitchen when Fanny was about 1, and this is before anybody was thinking about making their own baby food. I mean, everybody just fed their kids Gerbers. And I remember coming in, and there you were very carefully pureeing carrots and peas. And I said, "What are you doing?" And you said, "Well, I'm not going to feed her that junk."
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think that one of the other things that's remarkable about your book and about the way that you were raised, Fanny, is that unlike almost anyone else, your parents made a huge family. I mean, you really were raised by a village, and you talk about la famille Panisse, but it was more than just the people who worked at Chez Panisse. I mean, you found lots of people to bring into Fanny's life, and I think one of the things that's so enviable about this childhood is that so many people are raised in nuclear families with just 2 adults to bounce their egos off of as they're growing up. And Fanny had this wide group of people who were very close to her. I mean, it really is a village that was raising her. And it just seems like the most wonderful way to grow up.
I have to say that I think it began, with the inclination, the sort of reflexive conviviality and hospitality of the table. Like my mom, if your house is open and your table is open and you're bringing people and gathering people routinely around the table, then the kind of, when you then have children, I mean, I'm talking about people sort of in my generation, then it follows. Those people that are eating at your table on a weekly basis maybe are then the people who your children are sitting next to you and talking to. And so I don't think it was that my mom was necessarily thinking like, I need to get these people around to babysit or to be with Fanny. It was a natural extension of the reflexive need and love of having people into our home to eat. And it's something that I so completely, it was so naturally indoctrinated by, and it became such a part of my life as an adult living elsewhere, was that I needed to be able to have people over all the time and invite people in and bring them into the fold. And so I can't imagine that those people wouldn't then end up having a role in my kids' lives, because they're just, they come for the chicken and then they spend an hour drawing with your kid or whatever. But it's like, it's a beautiful way for that relationship to form. And I felt like that's how, the people who figure so prominently in the book, who are not necessarily Chez Panisse people, nonetheless became these fixtures. They were like fixtures first at the table, and then of my childhood, and then still remain these important family members.
Well, one of the other things you talk about is Alice's innate generosity, which I think is another part of that, she's sharing you with all these people. But you talk about how when you sit at the table with Alice, she's constantly like taking a lobster apart and giving you the best piece, or peeling a peach and giving it away to someone else, how she never takes the best bits for herself. And I think one of the wonderful things about this very big-hearted book is that you truly do, without ever specifically talking about it, talk about the generosity of cooks. I mean, I think the generosity of food people, and that it expanded to become a way of raising a child, but it really did come out of that impulse to feed people.
Exactly.
It's never felt more evident than it is now. Like the generosity of the people who give to us, we're now realizing they do it with so little means, like so little security. I mean, I think that's one thing that's been really striking about this moment in this pandemic, is that you have to just love to cook and have a restaurant if you're going to do it. You don't do it because you're going to become a billionaire. You do it because hospitality is innate. It's second nature, and you want to make beautiful things for people and beautiful experiences. And it is, I think, generally probably a kind of under acknowledged, not just, I mean, it's like a cultural gift, really.
I think that we're in a really difficult moment in the United States. I mean, not just because of the virus, but because so many people are divorced. 1 in 2 families are divorced, and people are working very hard to make livings, and they aren't home to be around the dinner table. So it makes it more imperative that families, that bring friends in and you all eat together, because it's that time when you decompress and you just talk with children about what they did that day, and you can't do that at the television set or with the iPhone on or whatever it is. And it's a breakdown of our family structure and our community. So I always wanted, when Fanny was little, I had 2 other friends that had kids, and I thought, well, maybe one day we should go to one person's house and the next, and move around like that, so that it wasn't always imperative that each one of us cooked, you know, for.
Well, of course, we all come out of that Berkeley idea
Yeah,
where, we should all live in communes,
Which
basically.
we are doing currently, basically. This is the new commune. Yeah.
But there are great benefits to living together. And we have this wonderful artist friend, Fritz Haig, who lives up north about 3 hours in an old commune from the 60s that he has rebuilt.
Actually, it was founded the same year as Chez Panisse, 1971. But it's this become a kind of neo-commune. And actually, I think my mom and I are both considered communards, even though we don't live there full time, just visit. But it's interesting what he's doing, experimenting with how people can come together and be creative, and around food specifically.
But it's out in the country. And so he had to figure out what to plant and how to really be self-sufficient. And I think that's something really important. That
back to the fruit orchard that you should get going today.
Well, it is one thing. I mean, it's hard to think that there might be some kind of a silver lining to this pandemic, but the idea that people are being forced to cook again, which all these people who've done nothing but go out to eat, order in, families who've never sat down to dinner together before are suddenly cooped up together. And what do you do with your kids when you don't know how to entertain them? You go into the kitchen and you cook something together. And, hopefully this will remind Americans of how important food is and what a central place it has in all of our lives.
And the local supply chain of, not just growing and cooking, but also getting things from the people who are near you. It's been amazing. Now we realize that if I say like, we need a lemon on Instagram, stuff like 10 people are like, can I bring lemons over to your house? Which is an unexpected boon of social media. But, because I mentioned that we cooked our last egg for the cherry bomb jubilee, and the next day we had 24 eggs on our porch. So we're obviously we're spoiled for riches, but it does bring these local systems out of the woodwork. Just incredible number of people have chickens that I didn't realize had chickens. And we had another bag of lemons from my friend Alex just deposited on the back, porch last night. And there's something that really brings, even though we can't touch each other right now, which is so strange, it's like there's a real fortified sense of community in this moment.
Yeah,
and
a friend just left a quart of milk on our porch.
Oh, I love that. Should we move to some questions from the audience? Is it
yes, we should take some questions. I have to find them. Okay. What food items should people think about differently to get the most out of when they go shopping at the grocery store?
Maybe it's beans.
Beans?
Beans, yes, beans. And I don't know, it's only been in this last year or so when I've been thinking about school lunches that I've learned to cook beans. I learned from Fanny. She always said, just put in all kinds of herbs and garlic and big stalks of celery and carrots, and don't worry about it, Mom, garlic, whole head. And I kept looking at these pots of beans and thinking, oh, this is too much or too casually done. But in fact, it doesn't matter because you fish it out after the beans are cooked. And it doesn't even matter if they're a little overcooked, because you can mash them into a puree and make something like a hummus with them. Or you can make them into a soup. But they're so versatile. And there's so many different colors and shapes. And so you can mix and match. And I love to make a pot at the beginning of the week, and then use it in different ways. It's always something that I can put in a little taco in the morning for breakfast.
Well, I have to warn people who are cooking beans for the first time that if you do not get them from a place that sells a lot of beans, you may end up with old beans. And it's very discouraging when you cook beans for like 6 hours and they're still.
Oh, there's a chapter dedicated to some old beans in my book, which is specifically about those like black beans in Mexico that we purchased from my mom being like insistent on getting organic beans from the one organic store that I think never sold beans to anyone, because why would you buy beans there when you could buy like a dozen varieties in the open air markets that were much fresher and more beautiful. So we cooked those beans for, I don't know, like 12 hours, and we just soaked them for more than 24 hours. And they still were such like wan, sort of insipid tasting beans. So it's true, you do want to start with fresh beans, but I have found that this method of making the broth really, really aromatic, just a whole, quartered onion and a whole head of garlic, peeled, closed, but a whole head, and as many spices as feel right for the type of bean. So if it's black beans, lots of dried chilies and cumin and coriander seed. If you're making barloti beans, you might omit that, but also add a little chili and the whole carrot, the celery, all the herbs. Like it really does make it taste, you're basically making a stock that the beans cook in, a kind of vegetarian stock. And it has redeemed even beans that that have been known to be slightly more on the stale end of the spectrum.
But it can be really discouraging. I mean, you cook them and cook them and cook them, and it's just like they will never, ever get done. Okay, here's another question. Fanny, what food memory of your mother from your childhood gives you the most comfort?
Well, you sort of already alluded to it, but I think it's peeled fruit. So there is a chapter in the book called "Peeling Fruit," I think, and peeling fruit, and it is an account of many instances of watching my mom peel whatever was ripest in the fruit bowl that would always sit in the middle of our dining table at the end of a meal, and the kind of slow, I refer to it as a kind of slow sacrament or something. Like it has there's a kind of ritual nature to it. And I think it was the way that activity kind of attenuated the moment in a pleasant way. Like a lot of things happen in our cooking repertoire rather chaotically and quickly. I mean, we're very, my nickname for my mom is Hummingbird, and she kind of moves around the kitchen in that way. But this moment of peeling fruit was this very slow moment, and that was pregnant with anticipation for whatever delicious pear or like really perfect peach, or if there was just delicious strawberries that she would trim and just squeeze a little lemon juice over, or something like that. And so I associate eating fruit in that way, especially at the end of a meal at night, when all the other senses are sort of dulled slightly and you're just waiting to taste something really flavorful and sweet, as being the thing that it also is like the most reassuring.
Okay, here's a great question for Alice. What advice can you give to parents about mealtime who are also now teachers and working from home?
The first thing that came to mind is to set the table, make it a ritual. Choosing the place, maybe lighting the candle. To think about that, the sort of placement, and the kids get to choose which plates go on the table, and maybe they actually light the candle to be part of it. But it's very important to be prepared. Be prepared because it can't always happen according to the schedule that you have in your head, or maybe I won't be able to get around to making that. But you have to improvise a little bit because kids are hungry, and allowing them to stir something while you're doing something else is, or shelling peas. Fanny used to love to shell peas, but being part of the preparation gives you a little bit more time. But I always like to have all the things I need in my pantry. I like to have my olive oil, my vinegar. I like to have, garlic is part of that always. And when I know that I can count on that, then I'm very comfortable about cooking in a hurry. I feel like I could make a meal in 10 minutes if I had to.
My friend who has 4 daughters, who's been homeschooling them, has just made making the meal one of their classes, which I thought was actually, I mean, we used to teach that. We used to teach home ec, and we used to teach, cooking in school. And, certainly with the Edible Schoolyard, actually making the meal is part of their work. It's part of the curriculum of the school. So it's not totally foreign to imagine that. And it gives her an opportunity to talk about like where each ingredient came from. So there's like little history and anthropology woven in. And then she has them measuring things if they're measuring out the rice or whatever they're cooking. And it seems she's like, I mean, obviously she's at like everyone totally overwhelmed, but it codifies the kind of time leading up to a meal. And then it also kind of ritualizes it in a way. Like, I think the other thing that's important is to change atmosphere when you're moving into a new period of the day. Like if you're going into a meal it's why lighting the candles is such a nice thing, because it changes the way that you're experiencing the light in a room. But the same thing with lighting a branch of rosemary or just changing the smell of a room is also a way of kind of separating space, both psychically, but also physically, which I think when you're so confined, you kind of need to figure out ways of moving through the same space in a different way.
I think I'll make a chicken stock today. Now that's something really great that we can do now, is to take a whole chicken and think about how many meals can be made. I always say that Jose Andres could make 6. I think I could make 3 or 4. And it's thinking of meat more as a condiment and using the bones from the first meal. Maybe it's you using the chicken breasts for the first one, and just having a smaller amount and using those bones as part of the stock. That the next day might be a tortilla soup, and you can use the braised or very cooked leg meat for that, and you just keep going.
Chicken pot pie.
Yeah,
and it smells
Chicken.
It smells good.
So my mom's ideal smell of a house is like warm, like simmering chicken stock on the stove.
Mine too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing smells as good. Nothing calms people down as much. And nothing is reassuring as knowing you have chicken stock in the freezer.
True.
Yeah. I would add to the children question that to give the kids some responsibility. We have sort of made childhood into a time of dependence, and I think one of the things that can come out of this is that if you're home with kids, give every kid a responsibility around dinner time, and let them help, and don't mind if they make mistakes. It's a meal. If it ruins one meal, it's not the end of anything. But I think it's really a time to say, this is your job, and this is your job, and this is your job. And, and let them help plan the meal. I mean, bring them into it. Cooking isn't one of the things I think we get to realize now is that cooking is not necessarily the grown-ups' work or the mom's work. It's the family's work.
Exactly.
And also it can be a pleasure.
It is.
It's a pleasure. It's like the great part of the day is to cook together, as opposed to a feeling of drudgery of having to provide something. I mean, my mom and I talk, or my mom talks about this a lot, this idea of like conflating work and drudgery, and cooking somehow got, and it was also a problem, a cultural issue, a much broader cultural issue, and even architectural, where we started to put kitchens further and further away from spaces of conviviality and gathering and just into these closets, but so it was just considered, so it was really considered undesirable work to have to go into that cloistered space and make something for everyone. But being able to cook together and actually enjoy the process and even learn from each other, which we're doing constantly now. I mean, my mom the other day was like, I think I like herbs more than I thought I did. You just use so many herbs. And at first I didn't know if I was going to enjoy that, but I really appreciate it now. And, just having this feeling of there being real reciprocity, and then there's not a monodirectional sort of learning that is transpiring in the kitchen now.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's one of the things that's happening is people are starting to, feel like the most fun part of the day is when you get to cook.
Yes.
So this sort of leads into that. Fanny, what was a food you love now that you couldn't stand as a kid, and what helped you turn the corner as to how you felt about it?
Anchovies. 100%. I mean, and I even harp on about it at length in the book. Anchovies I basically ate everything as a kid. I mean, the other day I was asking my mom, I was like, what did I really not like? And she's like, almost nothing. I mean, you really ate just about everything. And I have so few memories of hating or even resisting eating something, but I hated anchovies. Their smell was so aggressive. And then even when I was a teenager, I would clean loads of them when I was working at Chez Panisse in the prep kitchens. I'd be given
a way to make you hate them.
I was given a tin of just industrial proportions. I mean, I still don't understand how this many anchovies were gone through in a given day at Chez Panisse. And they would make your hands just reek for days of anchovy. There was like nothing you could do. And I persisted in disliking them through this period. I will say I always liked the vinegar cured ones, but it was like the salt packed ones that had that really intense smell. And then my mom found these olive oil packed anchovies from Spain that just taste like nothing resembling now I can eat all kinds of anchovies, but it was this pristine, perfect. They were super fresh. They were packed by a bunch of old grannies outside of Girona, and just, I had one of those anchovies, and it was almost like eating black beluga caviar instead of an anchovy. It was like such a delicious, unbelievably different.
Those anchovies with a pat of butter are the best.
No, heaven. And now I'm like full on anchovies, do or die. Like I will have them for on toast as dinner, just on a little garlic rubbed toast or buttered toast. But it's really one of those things that I did the most intense 180 on.
But it was just finding this one kind that changed you?
It was my gateway anchovy.
Because I suspect that the person who asked this question has a child who hates something and is trying to figure out how to lead this child into eating that.
I think my mom has good advice on this front, which is like, keep trying and just do it differently. It's like my friend Justine said that her son hated cucumber, and then she just cut the cucumbers in a different shape, and now he eats them. I mean, kids, we don't really understand developmentally necessarily what's making them choose certain things or bulk at certain things. And sometimes it's just a question of reintroducing. Sometimes it's the way it looks. Sometimes it's a different context or a different flavor combination. And I think that kind of persistence is rewarded ultimately, especially if it's something that you really love and you're just dying for your kid to, to start eating. Right. But it does require some creativity, I think, on the part of the parent. Or just sourcing really good version of it, which is what my mom did, I suppose.
So I have a question of my own, which will probably be the last question. And the question is, so in this book, you talk about the Fanny Goes to College cookbook, which sounds amazing. Has anybody tried to publish that? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, every vulture on the planet who's heard about that, because it's been mentioned in a few. And I'm teasing, but it's been mentioned in a few editorial pieces here and there, and they've always wanted, editors at various magazines have always wanted to publish the whole, more pages of the book or pages from the book, which I always resisted. And then of course, even Peter, my editor, Knopf, was like, come on, can't we just, maybe it could be in the book somehow, or, a few pages. And I was like, maybe the cover, but not the whole thing. It was such an intimate thing that was put together. It's hilariously art designed and very sort of eclectic in terms of how it was laid out. It was laid out by Bob, a character who features heavily in my book, but it was all of our family friends really rounded up and submitted a recipe, and it includes some incredible things. I mean, Marion Cunningham.
What did Marion send you?
And also Calvin Trillin's wife, Alice, a recipe for lonely girl pasta, and many other wonderful ones, several from Cecilia Chang. And I do think that it will be published at some point, but I kind of feel like I have to do it in 20 years from now. It just still, it needs a little bit more bronze on it. It's more passage of time, I think. I feels like something that is almost too precious, I guess.
Well, it sounds amazing. What did Marion send you?
It was, do you remember what? I'm trying to remember. I feel like it was,
is it something like French toast?
Pancakes.
Pancakes.
I'm trying to remember. I'll send you, I do have it to hand, so I'll send you a picture of that. Sorry, audience, not all of you. But maybe I'll get around one day. One of the favorite recipes, which I do allude to in Always Home, was just from Nilofer Chaporia King's husband, David, who is actually a really great cook, but he's a scientist who would often spend, just unbelievable stretches of time in the lab uninterrupted. And I was going off to college, and he gave me what I think was truly the most practical recipe, which was for an all-nighter little beverage, which was essentially a paste that you would make out of ground instant coffee and hot water from the bathroom. He's like, eat this, you'll be set for days.
Did you ever do it?
Oh yeah, no, it was the vilest thing on the planet, but it would really keep you awake, for a solid 15, 18 hours if you needed to write something all night.
Okay, we can't end on a vile note. So
no, we can't end on coffee.
I think you should talk about the recipe that you end on, which I think is a perfect recipe for this moment right now, which is coming home pasta.
Mm-hmm.
Which, is kind of what anybody can make, no matter, if you have some pasta in your cupboard, you can make this pretty much no matter how little else you, so long as you have some garlic, which is for every recipe in your book, so long as you have some garlic.
That's true.
And a little olive oil.
Yeah, that recipe, which we've sort of redubbed Always Home pasta now that we've been in quarantine for so long, is this recipe that we would make when we would come home from a long trip and you needed to eat something. It's like you had to slake your hunger immediately, but you also couldn't it couldn't be too fussy, and it also had to be something that the ingredients were more or less already on hand.
Quickly made, aromatic. Very important that you come back in your kitchen and it's, you know, after you've been gone for 3 weeks and it feels, you know, just
a little stale, and you need to reanimate it, and you need some atmosphere. And it's some of the things we've already been talking about, but when you start to cook the garlic and you smell the garlic, and when you put on a pot of water and it starts to bring some atmosphere and steam into the room, there's just a shift of feeling, and it kind of brings you back into space. And it's, you know, it's just garlic and maybe a bit of chopped anchovy and maybe some chili and maybe some parsley if you have it, and lemon zest if you have it. My mom and I did a little cooking video, which is on both of our Instagram feeds, which shows the method for coming home pasta. So we've been getting tons and tons of people sending us photos of all of their versions of coming home pasta, which has been, and people saying like, wow, this is so comforting. Like, this is exactly what I need to eat right now, which feels like an inadvertent gift that I've managed to give people with this. So if all people get out of this is coming home pasta, then I will feel gratified.
Well, I think that your book is a gift too, and a perfect book for this moment. So thank you very much. And it was great talking to both of you.
So nice to see you.
And I hope we will actually see each other in person one of these days, although it's hard to imagine ever getting out of my house.
I know. Me too. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.